This is the China Hollywood Greenlight podcast, episode number 43.
And rolling sound. Quiet. Here we go. Ready.
Speeding.
120, take 7. And action.
This is Caryn McCann, the host of the China Hollywood Greenlight podcast, a podcast about creating and distributing content for both Hollywood and China. If you like the show, please go to iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts, subscribe and leave a rating. These ratings really do help spread the word, which in turn attracts more guests. So it's a win-win situation. Any links mentioned in the podcast can be found in the show notes at the China List website, which is https://CHNLIST.com. And look for this episode, which is number 43 on our podcast page. Before I introduce today's guest, I'd like to start out with a motivational quote to encourage our listeners to continue on their path to achieving their own green light. And today's quote is from Peter Drucker, who said, "Do first things first, and second things not at all." The sponsor for today's podcast is the China List. The China List is a bilingual platform to connect industry pros and create jobs in Hollywood and China. For industry professionals, such as producers, directors, and talent reps, membership is free. Just go to https://CHNLIST.com and sign up. Writers, big news. You can upload your first script for free. No credit card required. Get your script seen in Hollywood and China. Use this special link, https://CHNLIST.com/first-script-free. And that will be in the show notes as well. A quick update on what I'm working on. I changed the China List membership website so writers can upload their first script for free. No credit card is required, so I'm getting the word out starting this week. I'm also getting ready for the Hong Kong film market, which happens March 14th through 17th. Also, good news, more distributors are interested in my TV movie, which is an evergreen seasonal film that is aimed at Americans as well as the Chinese diaspora. I hope to have good news soon. And now for the main segment. Today's guest is Kevin Geiger. Kevin has worked as an artist, animator, consultant, entrepreneur, professor, producer, and executive. He worked for Disney Studios as a computer animator and went on to independent producing. In 2008, he moved to China and was the first foreign guest professor at the Beijing Film Academy's animation school. In 2009, Kevin co-founded Magic Dumpling Entertainment in Beijing, developing original Chinese family content and leading to his return to Disney in 2015, where he founded the Disney China local content team and created Disney's first original Chinese TV co-production, Ban Jing Ba Liang. Kevin now is a professor in the animation department at Taipei National University of the Arts in Taiwan. He continues to develop animated features and immersive media with Magic Dumpling Entertainment. So, Kevin, thank you for coming on the show today.
Hi, Caryn. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Now, I gave the audience a brief overview of your background, but why don't you take a minute and tell us about yourself personally and your business?
Sure. I'll actually start with the business side, just because I wanted to make one slight correction on the timeline. You mentioned that I returned to Disney in 2015. I actually returned to Disney in 2012. So no biggie. There's a lot of dates flying around there.
Typo.
But no worries. In 2012, I returned to the Walt Disney Company in Beijing as a creative executive overseeing their local content production initiative. And then in 2015, that tour of duty was over, and I returned back to my independent ventures with Magic Dumpling that started to segue into virtual reality, immersive media, interactive content, and so forth. And then when you had mentioned about my current activities, I relocated. That's a very brief description of it, but I relocated to Taipei amid the pandemic of 2020, and I have been living and working in Taiwan ever since. Teaching at the Taipei National University of the Arts, but also working as the co-founder and head of production at Tel Retail, which is a company that's developing digital story worlds, virtual characters, and so forth. So branching out from traditional filmmaking and series into more interactive, immersive content. And my wife, Wen Fong, who is my partner in that company and also my partner in life, is from Taiwan. So my wife,
perfect.
Wen, is from Taichung. And we met in Beijing, actually, years ago. She was working there in Beijing as a teacher and also as an independent producer. And, our professional relationship eventually became unprofessional, and we got married and had kids. So I have 2 young daughters. I have Claire, who's 6, Emma, who's 4. And we've been living here in Taipei, as I mentioned, for the past 2 years now, kind of unexpectedly, but not unproductively. So we can talk more about that as we get into things here.
Okay, great. Well, I know you went to China originally to teach. Was that your, or was the original reason with
Yes
Disney?
and no. That was the surface plan, but there was a deeper plan than that. So I went to China to produce my own films, and the easiest way to get in and to get entree to people and venues and introductions and so forth was as a teacher, as a professor. So I have always taught throughout my career.
Okay.
My career has followed this sort of triangle of like big studio work with the Walt Disney Company or other players, independent production that I do myself, my own content creation, and then teaching. So I taught at CalArts in the evenings while I was at Disney in Burbank. I taught at the Beijing Film Academy while I was in China. And it paid almost nothing, but it was a great way to meet people. I went to conferences and festivals with the credentials of being a professor at, China's first film school. And I love teaching. So it's not just a strategic play, but it satisfies a number of needs in terms of like engaging with younger talent, eventually maybe hiring that talent into the productions or the companies that I'm working on or with. So that was kind of the impetus, and it really was I had a great run there from about 2008 until the pandemic started. Working independently, Disney came knocking and said, "Hey, you used to work for us in Burbank, and now you're here in China, kind of hacking through the weeds entrepreneurially on your own. Do you want to help us with this new initiative we're spinning up here for developing local content, TV shows primarily in China?" And I was like, "Sure." So that led to the role that I had as a creative executive in Beijing. But quite honestly, and part of, I guess, the arc of our conversation is that I saw things in China changing during the time I was there. So right around 2015, 16, when I was leaving Disney China, there was just sort of like a tightening up of the media environment, politically, economically. And when I say economically, the money was being made, but in terms of being able to transfer money back and forth overseas, et cetera, things were just getting much more restrictive. And the government was actually saying things very clearly, like, we want to reduce foreign influence in education and entertainment. And I was like, damn, those are my 2 areas. And, it was nothing overt, and nobody was unfriendly. I had many friends and colleagues, but I just saw this starting to change, and the climate was getting cooler, and focusing more on Chinese content for Chinese people by Chinese people, which is good. But foreigners were not, I was seeing the welcome mat was being kind of like reduced or pulled in a bit. So my wife and I had been talking about, for that reason, and also quite frankly, just for, not cost of living, but standard of living issues, to move to Taiwan. We were spending maybe 25% of our time each year in Taiwan, visiting in-laws, et cetera, and 75% in mainland China. I was like, well, maybe we should just flip that and live in, Taipei most of the time. And then still we had business that we were doing in mainland China that was continuing, although it was kind of rolling down to pop into mainland China, maybe 25% of the year. And like most people, the inertia was a big factor. Like, it's so much work to do, and the kids were in school, and just, ripping ourselves out of one environment and putting ourselves into another seemed like such a big deal. And then in January 2020, we were here in Taipei for our typical, Lunar New Year, Chinese New Year visit. And we thought we'd just be here for a couple of weeks. We packed light. and then, we had the outbreak, and we're like, oh, okay, maybe we should stay here for another week. And then it's like, oh man, maybe we should stay here for another month. And then like, I wonder if we should stay here indefinitely. And that's kind of what happened, is we eventually in the summer made the decision to just relocate. So everything we owned was still back in Beijing, our bank accounts, everything. And so we had to deal with that. We're still dealing with it. We're still sorting through all of that. But we basically reestablished ourselves here in Taipei in kind of an abrupt manner, but it was just what we had to do. So it's all working out, but it definitely was a trial.
Yeah. Well, you definitely landed on your feet. But good for you. Let me kind of pivot to like your day-to-day stuff, just so the audience can kind of understand, because you've got all these great jobs. You're professor, retell. Now, what are 2 or 3 main tasks you do on a quote typical day?
I understand the question. People may look at my CV and go, well, what the hell do you do? It seems like you're doing a little bit of everything. I see you're doing children's books, you're working in interactive media, you're teaching. Like, it's all basically kind of boils down to one thing, which is content creation. And I do that across media. So in terms of the different forms of expression, some of them are more personal, such as the children's books. Some involve teams, such as the things that I do for, and with my company. But there's basically 3 things. I thought about this when I saw the questions. Like, how would I describe it? 3 basic areas. Number 1, research. So I spend a little time every day researching. That could be story research, that could be technical research, that could be market research. But in some way, educating myself about what's going on now, what's possible now, what resources are available now, how to approach storytelling, in the modern era. So research, number 1. And then related to that, writing. So I'm not a writer. I wouldn't call myself that, although I guess other people might. I do write creatively for the content that we produce. I also spend more time as a producer, kind of giving notes and editing related to something that a screenwriter might be doing for and with us. I do write my own children's books. I blog. I do articles and so forth. So I spend a number of hours a day after I've digested something through research, writing about it or incorporating that into content that we're developing. And then the third one is design. So as an artist myself, as somebody who had a painting major and then eventually studied computer graphics as an animator, I still function as an artist and a designer, either directly on my own books or indirectly by, as I mentioned, working with another designer, giving notes, helping to guide the content that we're developing for whatever project is in play. So those are the 3 things: research, writing, and designing, pretty much every day.
Wow, you're a busy guy.
Yeah, and then there's the kids, right? So taking them to and from school and all of that. So it's pretty crazy. I do time boxing. I highly recommend it. So my schedule, I don't have a to-do list. I slug everything into the calendar and I move it around and so forth. And that kind of keeps me sane. But if you look at my calendar, it's like a game of Tetris.
Oh, okay. Well, we might have to get a screenshot of that or something just to, help us other scheduling.
I'll blur out the sensitive parts.
So now you mentioned, different businesses, got the children's books. As far as our audience is concerned, it'd be more like the film and TV side. And you've got the retell. How do you find, especially in Asia, these business partners? And how do you suggest listeners find perhaps either a business partner or a producer?
Well, that's a great question. It's something I have touched upon in my blog previously. You really need to work with people who you know and trust as much as possible, as much as you can trust anyone. I've been very lucky in that my partners for Magic Dumpling were my friends. And of course, you can have trouble with your friends in business. One of the old stories in Hollywood is how people go in with friends. We don't need a contract. We're all pals, right? And then something goes wrong, and then they're not friends anymore, and then it gets ugly, right? So I give that caveat. However, you really do, especially in China, it's very important. I think in Asia in general. Guanxi and the relationships and really having that bond of trust, such as it is. So I've worked with my friends to develop Magic Dumpling, one of whom became my wife. And then Wen and my wife, founded Tell Retell here in Taipei. But there again, in terms of additional partners, that's a great question, because I've been looking at people who I think are qualified in terms of some business acumen or some technical chops to come in as partners. But then you really have to think about, are they trustworthy? And even if they're trustworthy, are they aligned? Are they on the same life path that you're on? Do they have the same goals that you have? People don't need to have the same goals, but the goals need to be aligned.
Right.
And this is actually, I think, an important point. Almost never is somebody going to have the exact same goals that you have, but you want to make sure that at least for some period of time, those goals converge in a way that you can work together productively and then exit whatever you're doing together in a way that's compatible and hopefully fruitful. So I know many people, friends of mine in Hollywood, say, "Hey, Kev, I just got called up by this company, company X, and they want to work together on something, and they sound reputable, and I checked them out, and it seems cool, but they don't know anything else about them, right?" And so, that's something that you have to think about. But also, even when you're working with people who you know and trust, the tectonic plates that are moving right now in China are so large and so unpredictable. There's a volatility there that can affect even the most well-structured, most friendly arrangements. So, for example, I've had 3 projects last year, 3 projects that I'm not going to name names, but pretty much think about any Chinese company that's been in the news that you've heard about in the last year that's been smacked down by the Chinese government for being too big for their britches, either because they were, they were trying to go public, or they were trying to get involved in education, going into from entertainment into education, and got sort of like their comeuppance. We had 3 projects last year that were involved with various players, such as I've alluded to, where suddenly the project we were working on was just done because there was an edict from on high that, hey, this has been canceled, or we don't have the money anymore, or we're pivoting our strategies to this. And, working with friends of mine on the Chinese side, we're like, "Hey, Kev, I'm sorry. It's done. It's locked, and we'll pay you for what you've done so far," which is great, but it's over. Right. And so that can happen very suddenly. And, in my case, I was lucky. I did still get compensated for the work that I had done, but sometimes you don't. I mean, if it's a bankruptcy we're talking about, you can end up in a situation just like in the US where a company goes under, and you're left holding the bag, and you're standing in a line of creditors waiting to see what table scrap you can get. So that's something that is not new to business, certainly, but in China right now, with the control that the government is exerting over the media environment and the business environment in general, those things can happen without warning. Like, you try to keep your ear to the ground, and even my Chinese partners sometimes are surprised, like, "Oh, we didn't expect this," and then it's happening. So that's a real cautionary note for anybody who wants to dive in now. I know a lot of people, quite frankly, who are trying to get out because of that. As a consultant, I consult on China creative business, and I have a lot of producers and executives who are like, "Hey, Kevin, how can we get out? And can we pivot to Southeast Asia? Like, what are our options in Asia Pacific other than mainland China?" So it's a real sea change happening as I see it.
Well, let me follow up that with 2 questions. A, are these cancellations, dare I say, partly caused because you're a foreigner?
No, in many cases, they don't even know I'm working on the project. I'll give you a good example. We were working on, we were developing a screenplay for a major IP in China that people probably wouldn't know so much internationally, but it's huge in mainland China. And they were looking for a take on the story. It's the 5th film in that series. And we pitched 6 ideas. They liked 2 of them. They picked 1. So, and when I say we, it's Magic Dumpling. We were developing this screenplay, basically a full screenplay for this feature, paid work, and paid fairly well by Chinese standards. And then suddenly we heard from the general manager of the company that the government had decided that the topic for the film was going to be not this, but that. They just changed the topic based on one of the strategic goals of China for these 5 years. And they were like, "We're really sorry, but it's just changed now. We've got a new team on it. We'll pay you for what you've done so far, but thank you so much." It had nothing to do with the fact that I was a foreigner on the project. Even though I mentioned that the welcome mat is sort of like being pulled in, a lot of that is policy based, right? On the private sector, such as it is in China, there still is a lot of interest in having foreigners involved for the resources, the insights that we can bring. Also, sometimes just the validation. I've been on consulting projects where they really don't listen to me at all and have no interest in what I'm saying. But they're like, "We got Kevin on." "Oh, you got Kevin Geiger, great." And sometimes the people know me, sometimes they don't. But it's like they see my CV and they go, "All right, so you you've ticked the foreign consultant box, right?
Right,
So,
right.
It's not what I'm describing. Just looping back on your question, it's not reactionary, I think, to a foreigner being involved. It's bigger than that. It actually it's like it doesn't have anything to do with us. It has to do with where China is going in general.
Before I get to my next question about obstacles, let me just ask that second question. You mentioned producers are looking to get out of China. Are those foreign producers?
Yes, or even companies, people who have gotten in bed with a Chinese joint venture partner or just a wholly foreign-owned company, and now are trying to get out. And there's I don't know if I have the name right, but there's a China law blog that I refer to continually, which actually has been talking about how to close down your woofie, right, in a proper way so that you're not held personally liable for it. And you might think, what's the big deal? I'm not in China right now. I'll just abandon it. But if you abandon it, you could be in big trouble. And if you ever step back into China, you could find yourself in super big trouble for having abandoned something that maybe had debts or taxes owed. And you will be held personally accountable based on, the legal relationship that you had within that structure. So it's not something to be taken lightly. And so people have been talking to me about, not so much the law stuff. I'm not a lawyer, but strategically more about, so what are you doing now, Kevin? You're not there anymore. I was like, I'm focusing on Southeast Asia, given how that's heating up in terms of like streamers such as Netflix, et cetera. And I'll tell us more about that. So it's more along those lines in terms of the content strategy that I advise on. Then if there's anything legal that comes up, I very quickly will, defer to experts much more savvy than myself in that region.
Okay, well that is a big obstacle, which leads this close a woofie. But so that leads to my next question: what obstacles did you encounter on a past project? And it sounds like you have had your share. How did you overcome it, and what did you learn?
That's a great question. There's so many obstacles, large and small. Some obstacles I remember when I was working at the Walt Disney Company in Beijing, everything that we were developing had to go through the censors, the screenplays, the rough drafts, the storyboards, all of that had to be approved by SARFT and checked. And, there are many don'ts. Some things you don't even think of, like superstitions, right? Superstition is considered one of the four olds, as they would refer to it in China. So that if you had a comedy about feng shui, you can't do that because feng shui is a superstition. And so, sometimes you get a note back, you can't have this storyline about feng shui because it's a superstition. We can't have that. And like, okay, what are we going to do? And it's like, okay, let's just have the mom be obsessed with rearranging furniture. We won't call it feng shui, but she's just obsessed with interior decorating. So we kept all the story points, etc., but we just didn't call it feng.
Okay, good,
shui.
Smart.
And there were other things like that too that our Chinese team actually could navigate and say, the things that seem disastrous to me, we get a note back, oh my God, we can't do this. They say, hey, Kevin, it's no problem. We'll just do this and it'll be fine. I'll resubmit it. And then it's like, yeah, that's okay. So that's, there's some of that, but on a larger term, and what we might be more relevant to your listeners is just trying to sell something. So I remember scrambling around. One thing that was really a desperate situation was in 2011, Magic Dumpling had been going for 2 years. We were developing content that was getting attention internationally in animation magazines and so forth, but we weren't getting a deal. We weren't getting investment, and we were running out of money. We were bootstrapping, and the runway was ending. And even more importantly, like big players like Fanta Wild and so forth, and China Film Group were jumping into the water talking about quality and character development and things that they had never talked about before. And say, oh man, they're talking our game, but they've got more resources than we do. We're going to get crushed, right? What are we going to do? And that was around the time that I knew that Disney was trying to start up their own content initiative in China. And that's when I joined them as, VP of development. Basically, they started by looking at what we're developing. They said, we really like this work. We'd like to acquire it. So they actually bought 2 of our IPs. Stone Cold Lion, it was called at the time, Shizhi or Banjing Baliang, as you mentioned, was the final title. And then Tofu Boy, which is basically like the Pinocchio story told as if Pinocchio was made of tofu as opposed to wood. Okay. It sounds silly, but it's a good script, and we sold it to Disney, and that hasn't been produced yet, but it's in the vault somewhere. What I learned from that is that anytime you want to sell something yourself, right, as a creative who's involved with something, a script you're working on, an IP, there needs to be something else there needs to be a strategic relationship that person wants that you are key to. There needs to be something else you can provide to them resource-wise beyond that thing you're selling. So in the case of Disney, right, they liked the IP. They also liked how we were running things and said, hey, can you head up our initiative? And we were like, yeah, sure. So when you have writers coming into China doesn't want you as a foreign writer. They really don't. They might want a little bit of technical consultation, but what they really want is to broadcast their culture to the rest of the world. They want distribution, right? So and many people don't understand this. When you come to China, you're thinking, oh God, it's a huge market, so many people, so much money to be made. They're looking at you. They don't care about making you rich or paying you. They care more about the entree you could give them to the rest of the world in terms of company you're associated with, in terms of your network that can provide them with that entry to the global market.
So if you mentioned that you need to think strategically and just
yes.
thinking like a writer, resource-wise, if a writer has perhaps a sales company already attached or even a distribution company attached to their script, which might not be a co-production, but could have Chinese elements. It's not it's not the mainland Chinese scripts. It's the American writer script. Would that still be enough of a resource that would interest maybe?
Well, yeah, I mean, we're talking about the right thing now. And this is why you see many people, I think, such as yourself also, I would imagine, with like the writer/producer credit, because, the hyphenate, because as a writer, you realize, I have to kind of function as a producer to get this going, right? To get the ball rolling, as opposed to relying on other people. So it's the same thing in Hollywood. I remember when I was working in Beijing, Magic Dumpling, and I was visiting Lionsgate Home Entertainment. And I was talking actually to, I'll just name check him, Ken Katsumoto. And it was about Tofu Boy, actually. And he liked the IP, and I had been in LA the previous year. And he said, it's looking good. And so I came back for my annual checkup, right? And I popped in. And I was starting to pitch, and I'm doing my little pitchy thing. And then he's like, Kevin, stop. He said, where is the money? And I just stunned. And I was like, what? He said, where's the money? Where's the money? And I was like, I'm thinking like, well, don't you have the money? And I realized I was so stupid, right? I realized what Ken wanted was like, so do you have a Chinese distributor? Do you have the Chinese money on that side, right? So that I can put the American money on this side, or is it just you pitching an idea? Where are your distribution partners in China? Because he's looking at that. The Chinese, conversely, are looking at the exact same thing. So if you just walk in as a writer with nothing else but your skills and your ability and your background and your CV and your credentials, that could be enough. At one point it was enough, but now, no. You got to have a lot more than that. You've got to have like that big resource behind you that you are the entry point to get people's attention and to get them to buy in on you.
Okay, so that would be either a sales rep or a distributor or possibly a Chinese star?
It could be anything. Some. I mean, again, this is also just part and parcel of our business, right? What are the attachments? Who do you have attached? What do you have attached? Money, people, distribution, whatever. Distribution is key, as you know. I mean, if I were to come back in a pure business form in the future, I'd come back as a distributor because that's where the money is.
Exactly. Exactly. Yes. Content isn't king. It's distribution.
Distribution.
Okay. No, I like the fact that your company is called Magic Dumpling, because it leads to my question next, which says, if you could magically solve two current problems, minor or major, what would they be?
Okay. The first is that the pandemic never would have happened.
Yeah. Okay. Why not?
Seriously, it just for everybody, I'm sure I don't have to explain this, but if the pandemic never happened, if I could magically have it just all go away, we didn't learn anything from it. So it's not like we've come out wiser for the pandemic, right? Everybody's dumber than ever in some ways. Yeah. The pandemic never happened. So number one. And then secondly, in terms of current projects, I'd love to have investment on the things that I'm doing now. I'm working on it. If I can magically snap my fingers and get the seed funding that we need beyond what we're already putting in, that'd be cool. But it's just a matter of going back to the well, right? and applying the techniques that I've used, but in a new way, with the new content and the new era, to try to fund our projects and approach them in a way that doesn't require so much funding up front, but kind of in a stepped fashion, bit by bit, builds, momentum towards a larger content expression that costs more, but also can be funded because people are confident in what they've seen to that point.
Mm. Now, you mentioned earlier about virtual characters. Is that the kind of future projects that you're looking for or want to develop, or is there certain genres that you are open to or want to make?
Yeah, we've been shifting away. We started pivoting away from pure, what I call traditional content in 2016. So after we left Disney in 2015 and went back to like Magic Dumpling 2.0, we were just looking at the developments in virtual reality, right? Interactive media, the convergence between gaming and filmmaking, is a big shift. And just the opportunities that those are presenting. And then also, although it's a massive buzzword like AI, right? Everybody tosses AI around or stamps it on everything from a game to a loaf of bread to try to catch people's attention and sell it. But machine learning techniques are being used in visual effects for things like, fluid simulations to improve those, and human characters, digital replicates that sort of thing is an area that we're delving into in terms of how can you bring, people really enjoy watching something. They want to actually spend time with those characters and in more than just a passive viewing capacity. Like, right. So for example, let's say Loki, right? Who so many people seem to be a fan of. Like, what if you could have Loki with you as your buddy all the time, right? And sensitive kind of bad boy who like listens to you. So Caryn, how was your day? Oh, that's too bad. Hey, let's go out and do this. And that he's there on your phone, right? He can shift over to your TV set. He could be next to you as a hologram. And the through line is that the AI carries over all your devices, right? This is when you get into things like another buzzword, the metaverse and Web 3.0, where you can have persistent content that jumps from device to device in different forms, but it's basically the same either IP universe or the same entity, right? A virtual character. That's stuff that is not sci-fi. It's being developed now. The market need still is not really there. Like, it doesn't have great market traction yet, but I think that'll come in time as it gets easier and more brainless for people to use. There are also big issues involved ethically and with security when you get into this area. If you have a character who remembers you, that means that data that you've given it, that information is being stored somewhere. Is it being stored on your computer? Is it being stored in the cloud? What happens if the cloud server gets hacked, or if there's a government who can have a back door to go in or a front door to go into that server and take whatever information about you they want. So there's a lot of considerations. This is what's fascinating about it to me. On any project I'm involved with, there's the story, there's the visuals, but I really get into like the psychology, issues of visual perception, cognitive science. I kind of geek out on that stuff. General audiences may not care, but in the process of making this stuff and getting into it, that kind of feeds my brain in a way that makes it interesting for me any given day, whether I'm making money on it or whether I'm spending money on it.
Okay. Well, you've definitely got the right marketing hook. Sensitive bad boy. I am in. Okay.
How much money do you have?
Okay. Now here's a trick question. What question did I not ask you that I should have?
What question did you not ask me that you should have? I think, well, you did ask why China, like, in terms of me going to China, why I went. But I think this is the question that I'd like to flip this out to the listeners, that everybody listening to this, it's called the China Hollywood podcast, at least to this point still, is why China? So, if you're thinking about getting involved with China, why do you want to create Chinese content and or co-productions? Are you doing it just for pure business reasons? Do you have some cultural connection to China, either yourself, you are Chinese or have some Chinese heritage, or, somebody in your family? Do you live there? Why do you want to create Chinese content? And then there are two sort of sub questions to that. If you can answer that first one, move on to the next two. The second one is, how am I going to make money doing it? Like what's your plan, right? There's a saying in Chinese: begin with the end in mind. So what's your end game for this? How are you going to make money? And then the third and most important, how are you going to get that money out of China?
Right. Yeah.
And I mean, in a very practical, logistical way. It's much more difficult to move money around in general in the world now. The pandemic has seen an increase in fraud and scamming. So even I'm sure people who are listening can relate to the fact that just dealing with your bank in your own country, sometimes proving you are who you are so you can do a transaction, has become more difficult than ever. But moving money out of China, even if it's yours, and also into China, believe it or not, is difficult. There's a lot of scrutiny on where's this money coming from, what's it for, how is it made, etc. And so you may find that you've made some money. I have money in China right now. I can't get out for various reasons, just mostly related to the pandemic and bank accounts being frozen. And sorry, Mr. Geiger, you have to come in and sign this personally. It's like, yeah, I can't right now. You won't let me back in. All right, we'll just have to wait a few years.
Wow.
But even before then, that's just a personal anecdote. But even before then, it was difficult. I would tell people, if you have somebody in China who wants to sign a deal with you, so you're sitting in Los Angeles, maybe you visited China, they're in Beijing, see if they can just transfer 1 RMB to your bank account. Just test that out. See if they can and will. If they can't or they won't, walk away. Just 1 RMB, right? You're talking about what, is that 15 cents? Because if they can't do it, that means logistically they have no way to get that over, or maybe they are fake. I've actually been in situations where I was dealing with people who said they had a lot of money, and then when it came time to sign, they disappeared. And then they found out later they were forging bank documents, and that it was a scam.
Wow.
But they also may not want to. They may be legitimate. They may have the money in place, and this is like that whole thing about, you show somebody something. Hey, do you think this is cool? Yeah, I think it's cool. Would you think about buying something like this? Yeah, sure. I think about buying this. You want to buy it right now? Let me think about it. Right. And then they're gone, and you don't see them again, because actually putting that hard-earned money down and potentially losing it is something that people really think long and hard about. And again, reverting back to an earlier point, your Chinese partners don't want to give you money. They are working with you because they want you to bring them money. So this is the catch-22, right? People who are getting involved with China are doing it so they can make money. And the people who are partnering with them in China are doing it so they can make money. So, thinking through the end game is important. And related to this as well, the fourth point is China's long game does not involve you as a foreigner. And I'll just say, this is my own opinion, but I stand by it. The long game in China for the country, for the business environment, for media, etc., is not built for foreigners. It can involve foreigners, and it does, but it's not for foreigners. It's for the Chinese. And so you need to have a short game that piggybacks on top of somebody else's long game. Because even with Disney, for example, when we were working for them in Beijing, we were on this content initiative that they described as a 10-year initiative. Oh, that's cool. We could be doing this for 10 years or more. That's great. And it paid well, et cetera. When our 3-year contracts were done, they are, thank you very much. We have a strategic pivot, and we don't need you anymore. So Disney was moving to this OTT service. They were going to stream digital content directly into China, so they thought. And they cut a deal with Alibaba. And so they thought, we don't need to develop local content anymore because we're just going to stream it in. I was like, I think that's going to be a problem. Like, no, the digital space is unregulated in China. It's like, well, yeah, currently, this was back in 2015, right? But it's just that the eye of Sauron has not locked onto the digital space yet, right? It's still just like broadcast television, et cetera. And sure enough, right, they cut this deal with Ali. And then 2 or 3 months after it was announced, wham, the regulatory hand came down. That deal was scuttled. Everybody was backpedaling, Disney, Ali, like, we didn't mean to offend anybody. It wasn't, everything was on the up and up. We're sorry. And, refunding people's money who had bought these sets in China. It was so, and then our Stone Lion show came out like a year after that. They released it. Finally, it was on hold, right? So my point is, a company, whether or not it's something related to the political level or just the strategic level of the company, nothing lasts forever, right? It wasn't a 10-year initiative. We had 3 good years, but here's the point. There were 3 great years. I really, I'm not criticizing Disney at all. I'm really grateful for the opportunity I had with them twice in different capacities, and being able to make money as a creative executive in China. And we put 4 shows on the air, one of which was our own baby, and, kind of ride the wave out of that. It was great. But again, that was my short game on top of their long game. If you lull yourself into some complacency where you think that you're part of the long game for anything and anyone, you're probably going to be rudely awakened at some point. And that goes for China or pretty much anywhere else in the world. I'm not trying to be negative, but just cold, hard realism in terms of that.
Would you consider a TV series or a film a short game or long game?
It's a good question. It depends on how long it takes you to produce it and how long it lasts. What we see right now is, my God, TV series such as we might call them are super short. You'll work on like a 7 or 9 episode show for Netflix that people binge watch in a day, and then it's done. And hopefully you made a good enough deal that you've profited from that. But the cycle, right, of how people are consuming now is just faster than ever, including myself. I'm one of those people who I'll binge watch a show in a day or a week. If my kids are on my hands too much, it might take me up to a week to watch the whole season. That sounds funny to say it, right? I remember appointment television. I'm old enough to remember appointment TV. For those of you who are too young to remember appointment TV, that's where you actually had to tune in at a certain time on a certain day. It sounds crazy just saying it, right?
Yeah.
Like, what? Seriously?
Yeah, exactly. Kids don't know how good they have it. No. What advice would you give those aspiring to tap into I'm not going to say China, I'm going to say Asian market or even the Taiwan market?
Well, Taiwan doesn't have much of a market. It's a small island, and there is a content market here. And Taiwan has a history in entertainment, especially within animation, of doing service work of pretty high quality and great price for companies like Disney and Nick and others. But it's a market that's pretty negligible. And even ourselves, we live and work here, but we're focused outward. So the focus of our work, we're still doing work with mainland China, doing work internationally. Our target for our original IP is companies such as Netflix, HBO, Disney Asia Pacific Originals. But we can produce it here and create it here in Taiwan at a price point that I couldn't do in LA. So if I was in Los Angeles still trying to gather together writers, artists, etc., managers to do something, it would cost me maybe 6-10 times more than it cost me here in Taiwan. And the fact that more and more talent is either staying in Taiwan now with the pandemic or coming back, that's also beneficial. There was a big diaspora for a while, both Taiwan and Hong Kong, of people going to mainland China pretty much the same time I was there, right? Everybody's jumping in. Hey, there's money to be made. Let's go. Woo. And then now with the pandemic, people are kind of retrenching right back to their home countries where they've got citizenship and healthcare and rights that they may not have in a foreign country. Being overseas during a pandemic is scary, right? Being in a foreign country during a global crisis is serious stuff. So, people tend to revert back to their comfort zone. In terms of advice, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, Southeast Asia is really heating up in terms of content that you see coming from South Korea, things like Squid Game and Kingdom and so forth, Thailand, Singapore, Malaysia, a lot of stuff that's being shown in streaming services such as Netflix, etc., that used to be very niche, right? Something that maybe only fellow animators in LA or New York would bother to look at or pay attention to, but now it's kind of finding a broader audience. And so there's a lot of attention being paid to this area. So I would say if you're interested in, let's say you're a producer such as myself who was working in mainland China, or you're aspiring to work in or with Asia, just broaden your thinking. China itself is jumping into Southeast Asia in more ways than one, I guess, if you watch the news. But in terms of content, in terms of the content market, China, even though it has pretty much blocked Netflix and HBO and Disney from operating with their content distribution in mainland China, they want all of the pie, right? So Netflix has pivoted to Southeast Asia, Disney, HBO, and China's here too. So iQIYI, Tencent, etc. There's a big scrum, right, of activity, and this is great for content creators. So if you are an Asian content creator, especially if you're a Southeast Asian content creator, I see this as a really great time. There's like a renaissance going on. And if you are an ally, right, so to speak, a creative ally to that partner, I think there's work to be done, there's opportunity to be had, and there's money to be made. That's what I'm banking on in terms of why I'm here. I'm not here as a refugee. I'm here as a business person to try to capitalize on that myself.
Well, that's very inspiring, and that's encouraging. I think even I know very well, the challenges of working in China and the challenges of censorship and the whole kind of growing foreign sentiment. But there's a huge Chinese diaspora, and there's a huge Asian market that is ripe, and we see it every night on Netflix and HBO, all these great local shows. So, and a lot of these countries might not have the, dare I say, the writer's room history, or the. I think it's a good time for a writer if they're looking for, especially a writer producer who can bring something to the table, like a sales agent or a distributor, and then have some Asian elements. Or even, shoot in Asia or something that would attract the countries such as in Southeast Asia, possibly, but also the big platforms like Netflix or HBO or what have you.
Yeah, it's a delicate balancing act, because the whole Asian elements thing or Chinese elements thing, that phrase has been bandied around for decades, and there was a time in which Asian elements or Chinese elements was fine, but Asian audiences, and if you want to talk specifically, Chinese audiences are very sensitive to whether something just has like the window dressing or if it's authentic. And just authenticity in general is something everybody's looking for, irrespective of country, irrespective of demographic, right? People seek that. So if you're kind of just like sprinkling a little bit of some cultural content on top of your stock script or your stock approach, that's not going to be enough. There's a research that's involved, humility that's involved in terms of understanding that the Chinese writers or the Asian Pacific writers have a lot to say and a lot of experience of their own. It's different, right? And so there's that melding, that mind meld that has to happen. But also I just lost my point for a second. I was doing so well, and then I just had a brain fart on this point. About
like the writers' rooms, or how Hollywood writers might have, I guess you can't phone it in. I think you need to actually spend time, and this is why it's harder now with the pandemic, but like live in the environment, immerse yourself in the environment so that you really are, working with those people closely, seeing and understanding things yourself, bringing a perspective in that's valuable. As a foreigner, when I work with my team, whether it was my Chinese team at Disney or my own independent team, I bring an outside perspective that results in coming up with ideas that they may never think about in terms of how to take a fresh approach to something that they can speak to in great detail. They can really get into the weeds on the authenticity of expressing this in a certain way, but with the twist, right? Like with any script, right? It's like, what's the twist? What's the hook? The foreigner oftentimes can help not provide the meat and not just sprinkle window dressing on top, but say, hey, here's a really good hook or twist that what could we do something like this and catch people's attention that way. And oftentimes, that's where the most interesting work comes out. And you see great hybrid examples of that, as you mentioned, on the streamers that are available now. So I think it's things are changing, but it's not changing for the worse. It's only changing for the worse if you try to keep proceeding as though things are not changing. So, the dumbest thing to do is to keep on barreling forward as though, nothing has changed. Everything's changing. And so you have to change with it. Exactly. Okay, Kevin, what I wanted to also mention was, there's a lot of times there's opportunities for writers to maybe not shoot in China, but perhaps still have that, that target of the Chinese diaspora, but maybe shoot, like you were saying, Southeast Asia is booming, or, Western countries. What do you think?
It's a great question because there certainly are, there are Chinese people of Chinese descent, Chinese culture all around the world, and we do indeed need to make. I don't know if we need to, but I do make a distinction between there's the Chinese nation and then there's the Chinese culture, the Chinese ethnicity. Some people will say they're all one and the same. It's pretty clear that they're not all one and the same, given the fact that you have people of Chinese descent who are Americans or living around the world. One issue, of course, is that China, at least philosophically, is trying to reel everybody in back under one China dream, as they call it. Right. So I bring this up just because this actually speaks to a little bit of the struggle that you will face as a writer or a producer developing content for overseas Chinese. So Shang-Chi is a good example, right? Marvel, I think, did a really great job on that in terms of making it fit within the MCU and be fun, but also be, fairly authentic. Some people might, take issue with me on that, but I think, again, I'm a white guy saying that, but my wife liked it as well, and she's Chinese. But so there you go. But it didn't get shown in China. In mainland China. I think that was in some ways to China's detriment because they had issues with, this actor said this on his Twitter about something and we didn't like it. Or they just didn't feel that it was relatable in a certain way. So many people saw it, of course, in China, as they will find a way to do. But it was not, shown in theaters and really given the release that it could have had. And I know that Marvel and Disney were not thrilled about that. But anybody developing content has to realize that overseas Chinese are going to have an experience and develop like a lifestyle and an outlook that is different from their countrymen back in mainland China. And this is not to say that China's backwards in any way. I mean, places Shanghai, Beijing, so forth are cosmopolitan, Shenzhen, but there is a difference in terms of just the general outlook. And the receptivity of the film by the powers that be. So if you're developing this thing that you think is going to be a great hit, I guess an example I can give is that we were developing about 10 or 11 years back an animated feature film based on the life of Sun Yat-sen. Okay. And we thought, this will be, he's like the Chinese historical figure everybody can agree on, right? In mainland China, in Taiwan, overseas. We thought that naively, right? We couldn't have been more wrong, right? Because everybody wanted to control the messaging of how it was presented, what was being represented, what shouldn't be represented. And so it was actually much more white hot political topic than I could have. It wasn't the unifying theme that we thought it would be. It was the total opposite. And it actually got made. We ended up selling the rights and it got made by another company, but didn't really go anywhere. So there's no magic ticket. There's no, silver bullet for any of this stuff. And you really have to be conscious that right now the gap that's widening sociopolitically between mainland China and other parts of the world. And again, I don't want to get into the weeds on politics here, but it does affect your market. So again, begin with the end in mind. Where can you distribute? Is it going to be accepted? Are they just going to cut a few scenes out that they don't like, or are they going to reject the whole thing entirely and not show it at all? It really bears some consideration.
Well, that's the key question. I think you need to ask is where can you get distribution? That's the acid test.
Yes, and I remember there's a book, I think it's called The Producer's Handbook, that I referred to many times that will say that one of the guidelines of a producer will be that we will only create work that has a chance of distribution. Of course, anything theoretically has a chance of being distributed, but what is the hook? What would cause the distributor to even stop and take a minute to hear your elevator pitch, right? What is there that's attractive about it, that can provide traction with an audience, that can generate money for that distributor? If you can't answer that question, creatives don't like to think about this, but if you can't answer that question at some point, doesn't have to be right away, right? You don't want to disturb your brainstorming with these practical considerations too much, but at some point, you need to ask yourself, before I go further, where is this going?
Exactly. Well, that's good advice. Okay,
best advice I can. I still try to follow it as best I can.
Good. Okay. Now, in conclusion, would you like to share any social media details or website links?
I'll just give one because I set it up as the hub, so I don't have to rattle off like a laundry list. KevinGeiger.com. Okay. So if you go there, that's my hub of everything. At the top, you'll see links to all of my various activities, the children's book publishing that I do, the film work that I do, the teaching, etc. And then all my social media is there. So LinkedIn, Instagram, my email, basically more than you'd ever want to know about me.
Okay, well, that's great. That's great. You got it all organized. You got it all organized. Well, thank you, Kevin, for sharing your knowledge and insights on our podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
And we'll see you at the premiere. And now for my key points and takeaways. Key points today, I have 4. Number 1, is China rolling up the welcome mat? It seems like the welcome mat is being pulled if China is giving the cold shoulder to foreign film executives. Kevin says that's policy-based. However, the, quote, private sector still has a lot of interest of working with foreigners for their resources, insights, and in Kevin's case, the validation of working with foreign consultants. Number 2, show me the money. If someone in China wants to deal with you, see if they can transfer, now this is Kevin's advice, 1 renminbi, which is about 15 cents, into your Western bank account. If they can't or won't, you should walk away. If they can't, it means logistically they have no way to get that, or perhaps maybe they are fake. Kevin has himself had some bad experience where Chinese, quote, partners said they had a lot of money, but when it came time for them to sign, they disappeared. Worse, in one case, this Chinese, quote, partner was forging bank documents, and it was all a scam. So be warned. Number 3, here's a tip to sell something to China. There needs to be something else, a script, IP. You need more than that. You need a strategic relationship that your target wants, or that you are key to. You need some resource that you can offer beyond your IP. For example, distribution, investment partners, etc. Number 4, struggles you'll face to produce content for overseas Chinese. Overseas Chinese will have an outlook different from mainland China. There's no silver bullet to appealing to Chinese worldwide. Kevin alluded to a gap between mainland China and the rest of the world. So you first have to ask yourself the acid question, the acid test. Where can you get distribution? What is your hook? What would be attractive to a distributor? Now, takeaways. Today, I also have 4 takeaways. Number 1, China doesn't want foreign writers. According to Kevin, he says China may want some foreign technical consultation, but what they really want is to broadcast their culture to the world. They want distribution. China doesn't care about making foreign writers rich. If you want to work with China, focus on your short game that piggybacks on top of some Chinese long game. China cares about the entree a foreign writer can give them to the rest of the world in terms of your company or your network that can provide them entry to the global market. So don't lull yourself into thinking you can be part of China's long game. Number 2, writers, you need to be producers too. If you are serious about attracting Chinese money or distribution, you need to first try to get a U.S. or foreign sales agent or some kind of distribution contract. It's not enough to have your CV and your script. What are the attachments? Money, people, distribution that you can bring. Remember, distribution is king. Number 3, questions you need to ask yourself. Now, this is where Kevin really shines as a consultant. He has some great questions that you need to ask yourself. A, what are you thinking? Why are you thinking of getting involved in China? Why do you want to create Chinese content and or do co-productions? Are you doing it for pure business reasons? Do you have some cultural connection to China? B, how are you going to get money doing it? Begin with the end in mind. What's your end game? C, how are you going to get money out of China? It's more difficult to move money around in general now. The pandemic has seen an increase in fraud and scamming. Even in your own country, you may have to take extra steps to prove to your bank you are who you are so you can do a transaction. Moving money in and out of China is difficult. Number 4, broaden your horizons and target Southeast Asia. Now, we all know China has blocked the major American streamers from operating in China, Netflix, Disney, etc. However, according to Kevin, Southeast Asia, which includes South Korea, Thailand, Singapore, Malaysia, etc., are the hot ticket. This local IP is attracting a broader audience. Kevin believes if you are a Southeast Asia creative ally or partner, there's opportunity to be had and money to be made. Just don't sprinkle Asian elements on your American script and expect it to sell. Your story needs to resonate with the local audience. Well, that's the show. Thank you for listening. To show your support, please go to your favorite podcast directory, subscribe, and leave a rating. Help us out by rating this show and share it on your social channels. I appreciate your support. And producers, directors, and talent reps, remember, the membership to the China list is free. Find the next great script or writer before your competition does. You can also post tailored calls for submissions on our private writing jobs page. That's free too. Sign up at https://chnlist.com. And writers, remember, you can upload your first script for free. No credit card required. Get your script seen in Hollywood and China. Use this special link, https://chnlist.com/first-script-free. That's the show. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you at the premiere. Bye. 一会儿见.